finish up with some listener questions. First one comes in from John Thompson, who says, if the match play ends up being played behind closed doors, which player do you see that change helping the most? I'm thinking Ian White.
I mean, that's a good shout, but at the same time, Ian White did better last year on stage than he did in matches that were behind closed doors. He didn't win any Players' Championship events last year, while he won a pair of European Tour titles, made the semifinals of the Players' Championship final, and did well on a lot of the other European Tour events as well. I don't think it adds that much to him playing it behind closed doors, if it would add anything. That said, at this point, all the players I think are equally, or almost, I can't say all, but most of them seem equally comfortable playing both in front of a crowd and behind closed doors. Who it might benefit is someone like who might get a bit of stick from the crowd and not necessarily be able to handle it. Someone like Daryl Gurney, who has struggled a bit in the past year or so in big tournaments on TV after winning those pair of titles, but has still been a consistently fairly good player on the floor. I think playing it behind closed doors might just get Gurney that edge back that he needs to get back to being one of the top 4 players in the world. Also, some of the less experienced players, maybe someone like a Joe De Sousa, who's going to be making his debut in the match play, hasn't yet really broken through on TV, but has been just dynamite on the floor. I think playing it behind closed doors could really help him. But I think for most of the players, I don't think it'll really make that much of a difference. So I'm not going to say Ian White. I'll say of the seeds, Daryl Gurney. Of the non-seeds, Jose De Sousa.
Yes, it's a really good question, isn't it? And it's a hard one to answer. I mean, the Ian White, he could be one that maybe does jump off the page straight away. I mean, but then again, as you mentioned, last year he did so well on the European Tour with big crowds, and the one game that sticks out for me is that game in Holland. He had all the crowd against him, against Michael van Gerwen in the final, and he came out on top. It was one of the highlights of the European Tour last year, and he picked up a few titles there. As you mentioned, had a big run to the semi-finals in Minehead, so he's a player that's getting used to performing well on the stage. But on the other side of things, he is one of the best players on the floor, and if it is going to be an environment like that where you've got no crowd, it's going to be completely quiet. He's one of the players that over the last few years has performed so well in that environment, and you've got to think that he'll be at least the odds anyway. His odds would be shortened if it is played behind closed doors. But yeah, you mentioned a few players there, like maybe that don't get on with the crowd. I mean, Going Price, most places that he goes to, okay, it's died down a little bit compared to this time 12 months ago, but sometimes he does have the crowd against him if there's no crowd at all. We've seen how well that he can perform in Players' Championship events. Last year he picked up a couple of titles in one weekend, so he can perform well on the floor. Krzysztof Ratajski as well, he's picked up so many titles on the floor, and he's one of those players that in terms of PDC televised events, still waiting for him to have that big breakthrough. So maybe this could be one where you've got no crowd and he's used to that scenario as well of playing behind closed doors, Players' Championship style events. It could be him. But another thing to point out as well is if this event is moved, and there's a few rumours going around that if it is moved away and there's no crowd, it will be at the same venue in Milton Keynes. Maybe it could be a good idea to keep an eye out on those 5 Players' Championship events, because they're going to be held the week before the World Match Play. So if players get used to those scenario, that setting, then they could be the ones to watch out for in Blackpool, or the World Match Play in a different venue.
The World Match Play in Blackpool and Milton Keynes. Anyway, next question comes from Philip Wolf. It's something we talked about, I think, on our 100th episode special, but that was now a long time ago. Who's the most interesting podcast guest we've had on yet?
Yes, and this was, we did a Twitter Q&A. Well, I did a Twitter Q&A on our Twitter week or so ago now, and this is one of the questions that came in, and hopefully we'll get you involved. I'll give you a bit more notice next time, get you involved on that as well. But yeah, this was one of the questions that came in, and the answer I gave was Justin Pipe. We had him on in one of our World Championship preview episodes the end of last year, and it was a chat that I didn't even do. It was one that you did, and it was so interesting. We've wanted to get him on for a little while, I think, since we started the show, and we've never had the chance, but he was very gracious with his time. And when I was listening back to the interview, he came out with so many things that we'd never heard of, like the thing about the Premier League. He was once told by a PDC official that even if he got into the places where you qualify automatically for the Premier League, they'd never pick him. So some things like that, that catches you a little bit by surprise. So he was very open in that respect. One player who we've had on quite recently this year, Aaron Beanie, was so interesting to hear from as well. Someone that it was probably his first or second ever interview that he's ever done. So he was saying that he didn't really know what he was going to say, didn't know how to do the interviews, but he was just so fascinating to hear from, and he was so surprised that he went all the way and got that tour card at Q School. But you could just tell from hearing him, listening to him on the phone, how excited he was to play on the tour. And yeah, I'll probably go with them too. But there's so many more, and I'm sure you're going to come out with a few that maybe were done a little bit before.
And I agree with those ones that you said, and Pipe was one on my list as well, at least with the interviews that I personally asked the questions for. That was one of the 2 or 3 most interesting, and did not expect it to go. I think it was a 16, 17-minute interview, but just the real honesty in his answers and the emotion in his answers made it really interesting just on the phone while I was taking the interview. I didn't realize that it had been 17 minutes by the time we were done. Another one that I did that pops to mind was one of the very first female players we had on, Lorraine Winstanley. I think it was right after she won the World Masters for her first major title. And I think the interview went like 11 or 12 minutes, but then I ended up spending another 15, 20 minutes on the phone afterwards just talking, because she's just such an interesting person and also very free with her time. Those, I think, are the 2 most favorite interviews that I've done. Ones that you did, I've said it on the 100th episode, said it before, the Darren Johnson one. I was on the phone listening to that one while you asked him the questions, and I normally, like, at least before when I was recording everything, I would send you little notes saying we're 5 minutes in, just so that we could keep it, if possible, to 10 to 12 minutes. I just didn't send any notes because I was just like, this is great. And it was a player that been on the tour for a while, but no one really knew much about. It just made his first final, and it was really one of the first interviews he had done despite being on the tour for a while. And it was really just interesting to listen to. A couple others from the following year. On the same week, we had 2 players who had never done an interview before, and they both messaged us afterwards saying that was my first ever interview. And on the same show, Mark Wilson and the other Martin Adkins, as they qualified for European Tour events. And I think the fact that we were able to get 2 players to do their first interview, you mentioned Aaron Beeney, but to have 2 on the same show, and had no idea that either of them had never done an interview before. I really enjoyed that, and I found that an interesting week, having both those at the same time.
Final question then coming in from our listeners this week, and it's one that only you can answer. It comes in from Stephen Mann, who says, with the Pro Tour returning, will Burton come back to Twitter and share his tables?
We'll see. We'll see if I'm back on Twitter. Could always do it through the Weekly Dartscast Twitter account if I'm not. But I'd rather keep everyone in suspense, I guess, since... No, I don't know. We'll see. I'm enjoying my time off Twitter. Social media, especially during coronavirus, is just fairly toxic at times. And I'm enjoying being mostly off it. I'm still seeing some of it on Facebook, but we'll see. That's all I can say.